Alors, je viens d'avoir le feu vert pour démarrer.
Now I've got the green light to start this conference called The Color of Translation. Let's welcome Adrian Igoni Barrett, Maboula Soumahoro, and Alain Mabanckou. I will introduce you to them, or them to you. Before starting speaking of this tricky issue, so Maboula Soumahoro, you teach at the Tours University. You specialize in African and American studies. You also work on the Black/African diaspora. You're a specialist in language, literature, and culture of the English-speaking world. You're also the president of the association Black History Month, dedicated to celebrating history and Black history and culture. And you've written a book called The Triangle et l'Hexagone. It's a reflection about Black identity. You've also written one of the texts of this book, Sorority, and the title of your text is There Are Five of Us, and you are also a member of the symposium organized by Alain Mabanckou in 2016. I'm so sorry. No, yes, I wasn't part of the symposium itself, but I wrote a text that was published in the framework of this colloquium, thinking of writing today's Africa, published by publisher, always important. And now I will introduce your neighbor, Adrian Igoni Barrett. I'm happy to see you again. Yesterday, almost at the same time we were here, you've written two short stories anthology and a novel, Black Ass, and I heard that you're writing at the moment a second book. One of your anthologies has been translated into French. In French, it is called Love is Power, ou quelque chose comme ça. And it's translated from Nigerian English, if I remember well, translated by Sika Fakambe. And I'm not sure I have to introduce Alain Mabanckou, nevertheless I will do it. He's a writer, a poet. He writes essays. He's been translated into 20 languages. First, African America, teaching at the Collège de France. You've got 8 lessons on Africa that have been published in Grasset. You teach French-speaking literature in UCLA. And you've also written with Abdomara Nouaberi the Dictionnaire enjoué des cultures africaines. You're also a translator yourself. Bête sans patrie, written by Uzodin Matiwiala, who was one of our guests last year in this festival. And you've been for a short time director of the collection Symposie. So you do so many things. So we are to speak about the color of translation. Of course, everything started from the debate, the translation into Dutch and Catalan of poems of Amanda Gorman. Amanda Gorman is this 22-year-old young lady, black lady, invited in for the oath of the investiture of Joe Biden, and at the end of February, if I'm not wrong, and the activist and journalist Janice Dole in the Netherlands questioned the choice of the Dutch publisher who chose Marika Rukelinches, who's a writer and a poet, because, according to Janice Ball, a young black activist would have been a better choice for translating into Dutch these poems. Then social networks were triggered, of course, and Marike Lucarinchville decided to drop out of the project. The publisher apologized. A few weeks later, the Spanish publisher fired the translator who had finished translating the poems and saying that a white man couldn't translate those poems. So, of course, all the media started speaking about that. Translators also, much ado about something. And in order to get ready for this session, I've read many articles written by translators, without any specific passion about the issue, but translators from minority communities. Of course, you don't have to be black to translate a black author. Nevertheless, there was some ground that could be explored. So the dispute today is interesting. Alain, I know that you reacted from the USA in a video clip on Facebook. And there you said that literature was beyond borders and that it's a stand that is not impossible, but it's another way of being racist when saying that you have to be black in order to translate Amanda Gorman, or to be young, or to be a woman. Yes. Thanks a lot for giving me the floor and the opportunity to speak about that message I sent, reacting to this dispute with the purpose of being clear with the journalists who could have thought that I was a specialist in colors or translation in order to reassure one stand or to be in between stands. Anyway, I wanted my message to be clear from the bottom of my heart, and the essence of this message was as follows. I've always considered literature as a long journey, an odyssey. I've always seen literature as a pilgrimage during which you see different landscapes, and unity in one journey can kill the multiplicity of your imagination. And I think that many great authors that I've read in their translation, whether they were black, yellow, or white, actually, I've never thought of the color of the skin of the translator, giving some examples. One of the authors I've read in French, and I wrote a book about James Baldwin. The translations weren't made by a black person, a gay person, an African American. Sometimes a white man or a white woman translated his books the same way. The texts I've read of Richard Wright, Claude McKay, or famous authors were translated this way. And at the same time, I acknowledge that when we speak about translation, it's true that very often we've had translations made by white males, and I also think that the experience I gave them was an inner experience, because now I'm the director of the poem collection Le Seuil. We made an offer in order to buy the book and publish it. So I understood that when we spoke about this situation in France, we thought that the author wasn't in favor of the dispute. It's a message sent through her agent saying that Amanda Gorman would prefer if her texts were translated by somebody of her age, preferably a woman and preferably a black person. So it's not a dispute that started in Europe. So maybe my reaction and the fact that I was upset came from that, because now on, if a writer demands that his or her text be translated by someone with a specific characteristic, that could be an activist attitude. And I'm not always comfortable when literature puts before imagination activism. So for people who have suffered, who are still suffering, we cannot feed the dispute with another form of ostracism in order to convince a part of the debate. It's interesting to have a debate, but nowhere we should demand a certain color to literature. And maybe that changed my perspective when looking at the text and the efficiency of this anthology of poems. In parallel, at the same time, I had made an offer for another black, African-American author, famous, that is read all over the world, Sarah Keith, who was okay to accept the offer without demanding anything regarding the publication of our texts. So I thought that the debate should be enlightened, because I read articles in French where we felt that the author wasn't interested in the debate. No, the opposite. The author actually started the debate globally, demanding specific characteristic for the translations. So, Maboula, Soumahoro, you studied in the USA. You also studied many things about the African-American community. So you, as an academic, how could you analyze the reasons for which Amanda Gorman made these demands? Janice said afterwards that maybe it was a missed opportunity, saying that the point is not to say that a black translator cannot translate a white writer and vice versa, but for this poem, for this specific book, in the framework, for instance, of hashtag Black Lives Matter, that was meaningful. So beyond translation, beyond translating poems, isn't there a symbol here? Of course. Good afternoon, everybody. And for the last time today, I want to say that I'm very happy to be here, despite my situation, and thanks a lot for the organizers for organizing things for me. So in order to give you an answer, of course, there is a symbol in this dispute, and I understand why Alain wanted me to be part of this debate, because he knows that we definitely don't agree about it, but it's okay to disagree. We can agree to disagree. And Alain is more than happy to debate with me. So the symbols are here, but I don't think the fact that the way the media covered the issue wasn't fair. It was easy to react after the explosion in the social networks and to underline the racial tensions, whether in France or in the USA. But I think there is too simple a way to look at the situation. I'm not really interested in the social networks, so I didn't overreact it. But when we think of over this issue, one of the questions we can ask ourselves is not that whether a white person can translate a black author. It's something that they've done for ages. Now we can ask the opposite question: can or have black translators translated white writers? Of course there have been, but as systematic as the opposite. And then you start a story. It's an intellectual and economic history, because beyond the color of the translator, whether she's a woman or he's a male, we question the professional opportunities and the issue of the education of translators. So the history of racial processes, racialism in the Western world is completely disconnected from these translations upon which we react, because if we speak about white people and black people, we speak about historic moments that have forged these identities, and it's completely, we're not speaking about biology, we're not speaking of essence. These are constructs, political, intellectual, economic, educative, religious, in the modern times, that have put on the global, in the Western world, black and white identities. And the way they were made up, the white identity is superior to the black identity, intellectually, economically, politically, etc. Now you understand where I'm going to. So when you are part of a group that is favored or not favored by society, life, experience, professional opportunities are not the same. And to go back to the issue of education and training, when you are part of a community or a group that is not favored racially, you're not a thing worth studying. A famous example, for instance, history about Africa. Africa hasn't been worth studying because nothing was happening there. Nothing is written there. Nothing was written there. So the reason why Africa entered into the Western psyche is due to several factors. First of all, white people or Western people have started questioning that, and people from the African continent who started working in order to prove, and it's a bit sad, the worth of Africa. With the same logic, you can study translation. So, if you are a specialist of English, in your training, will you be educated about African American English, African Caribbean English? That is to say, during your education, having to go to Jamaica, for instance, to Nigeria, to Pakistan, to places that are less associated traditionally with English, such as the UK, the USA. So your diploma will depend on a certain form or certain forms of English, and other forms of English associated with less favored people. You won't be exposed to that. So as a translator, when you're faced with a text that happens in the African American community, one of the first questions you have to ask yourselves is that, have you got the tools to understand, to translate the text? And if you don't have the tools, you can train yourself, of course, and you can read a book. But is it enough in comparison with other people who do have this knowledge, who do have the competencies, the skills, but are not officially acknowledged by the academic institution? It's a way of approaching the dispute, and you have to have a more complex approach to that issue. And I will conclude saying that you've got other African-American authors that don't have the same vision of as Amanda Gorman's. And it makes sense because they don't have the same age. But Amanda Gorman, invited by the Biden administration, has been invited as a young African-American woman, member of the hashtag Black Lives Matter generation. So she's biased, yes, subjective, regarding the challenges of translation. The debate can be public without saying that it's a new form of racism and it is different. And actually, I will take advantage of the situation, saying that there are different generations of French white translators and also black translators. And I know that there is a translator in the room. She translated Eyes Were Watching God into a title that matches better the title of the original book. Igoni, Barrett. Yesterday we ended up our session speaking of Nigerian English, and you said that in computers, you can choose British English, US English, but Nigerian English is never an option in computers, and that languages always evolve, and you add things to the languages, etc. So you've been translated into many languages, in Chinese, in French, in other countries. So the issue of choosing your translator, is it something important for you? Have you questioned the capacity of your translator of grasping Nigerian English that is at the heart of your writing?
Before I answer that question, I would like to say you beat me to mentioning my translator, because Sika Fakambi, who translated The Eyes Were Watching God, was also my translator, and she's in the room right there. Yeah. Now, did I?
You should give the name.
Oh, yeah, Sika Fakambi. Now, actually, when I got invited to this panel, I thought, what am I going to contribute to this conversation? Because in a sense, I heard about the kerfuffle, involving Amanda Gorman and the translation of her poem into Dutch. And I thought, that seems a young lady who's new to the business of publishing, because there is the business and the arts, of it. And she's new to it, so I just assumed she had something to do with it, with the fact that there was this trouble about translation into Dutch. But then yesterday, I decided that I thought this panel is really about translation. And I know Alain, translates, but then I have no background in translation, and I wanted to hear what a translator had to say about this, because I have my views, but I wanted to know what a translator would say. So I went to have dinner with my translator yesterday, and we talked about it for hours. And one of the things I walked away with from that conversation was that it felt to me like Amanda Gorman's publishers had made a commercial decision that, unfortunately for them, they didn't realize will be politicized. They thought they would take a young, upcoming Dutch writer, link her with a young, upcoming American writer, and have a bestseller. That's what they wanted. It was purely commercial. It had nothing to do with who was the right person for the text, in my opinion. And then people reacted to that. In a sense, they thought, they probably, suspected what the publisher was doing and reacted to that. And once it got politicized, it didn't make commercial sense anymore, because the point was to take two, popular people, put their names together and have a bestseller. But now if you're getting a controversy out of that, you better run away and, don't upset the market. I am not sure I can really blame Amanda Gorman for what happened, because I haven't really in public, in the newspapers, come across any statement she's made about that issue. The statements I've heard have been from the Dutch writer who stepped down, the bloggers who started the questions about the right, about whether the translator was the right person, and the publishing house. So, but it might be it might be that I've been remiss and I've not looked in the right places, because I wasn't, interested in that topic really at the time. Since then, last night actually, I now also realized that this topic, and where I want to come into this topic from, is in a sense the question of the silencing of translators, and the fact that, a translator, in my experience, is not tracing paper. It's not, the translator is not carbon paper that you just put over a book and you trace out the words in French. No, a translator is actually a writer who's reinterpreting that text. I remember that it was for many, I started reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez as a child. And for me, reading Gregory Rabassa's, translation, or Edith Grossman's translation, it didn't occur to me that, that someone else was mediating between Marquez and this Nigerian child reading in English. And it was many years later, after reading Love in the Time of Cholera for, over 20 times, that I realized, actually, this guy wrote in Spanish. So these sentences that I think are the most beautiful things ever were actually, there was someone else who wrote them, and whose name is on the book, but who somehow you never pay attention to. And I think this conversation can be, can be aided by publishing houses before they start making purely commercial decisions. They should think about the translators who put in the work, which is necessary, and do a better job of getting the right, of getting the right voice for a book. Because then there will always be people who will have complaints about any decision you make. Even if you decide to translate your book yourself, like Ngugi Wa Thiong does, he translates his own books from Kikuyu to English. But there will be people who complain about that even. So, but if you do, if your decisions about who translates comes from a place that the majority of people can understand, then it will never rise to the point of a worldwide controversy about a 20-something-year-old writer publishing a poem in Dutch. Now, my engagement with my translators. I don't speak French. I don't speak a word of French, which in Nantes feels like I'm losing something because I'm missing all these beautiful conversations. But when and I am an artist, I am a writer who sits down and creates a piece of work, but the moment I decide to submit it to a publisher, that's the business. That's the business of publishing. I want it to be successful. I want to make money from it. And so when a publisher says, I will take your work, I believe in your work, and I will go and find the right translator in a language I don't speak, I have to trust them. Because how am I going to know who's the right French translator for me? And so in the case of Edition Zulma, who published me in French, my wife speaks French, and so once I got the first editions of the book, I gave it to her, and and she confirmed that this was a great translator. But I also have to say that I began to sense that the translator was the right person for that book from the sort of questions she'd asked me. But the thing is that I only sensed that after I'd accepted that she was the translator for the book. So you cannot, in many ways, as a person who doesn't speak the language you're being translated into, have that much control over it. You have to trust someone. And you can decide to trust your friends, you can decide to trust Twitter, or you can decide to trust your publisher. In the end, whoever you decide to trust let it be done for reasons that you can live with. And I can live with every single translator that's translated my work so far. And I hope one day Amanda Gorman will, also realize that, well, it's not even about her. Let me put it that way. Because I want to end with the point that I don't really know what she thinks at this point, because she hasn't made any public statements to my knowledge.
Yes, what Igoni is saying is very interesting indeed, because I had this experience of translation. I was a translator myself, and it was not the easiest translation at all. I had to translate English, Nigerian English, into French, and English-speaking people, so that it was considered as a sort of broken English. So should this translation be some sort of word-to-word translation, But I then understood that translation is not simply an echo. It's not a photocopy. It's not a carbon of a duplicate. That is not what it is. And then the publisher would put a seal and certify that it's correct. Translation is a creation. Translating is creating. And this creating operation requires a revolution in the mind of the translator. He has to use imagination. He is free sometimes. He makes choices. It's more than knowing the culture of this or that people. Igoni Barrett, for example, you're giving examples. The guy wrote in Kikuyu, he translated from Kikuyu to English, and what he's translated is sometimes attacked by those who speak Kikuyu. So what about the competence of the person who is actually translating? Should I give the translation of this text to a black guy because he's black, or because the white guy is competent, but I put aside the white guy because I prefer the black guy who's got more melanin in his skin? And the second thing, many texts which we read, maybe people don't read literature as a translation. Many French literature, many books in French have been translated into an African language. Le Petit Prince, for example, Saint-Exupéry, it has been translated into Kikuyu, or, I don't know, Wolof, by African translators. And nobody told the African translators, you too black, you don't deserve translating Saint-Exupéry's work. His name and his skin was as white as the sky, or They just tried to find the one who, thanks to his translation, would be loyal to the text, or would, you cannot at 100% translate a text from one language to another language, whatever the color of our skin. I'm sure that in a translation I made of Zoimba Ewaila, even though the book was a bit successful, I'm sure that some way I betrayed something. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I missed something because I did not understand the culture, or because it was my first work of translation, because I didn't have enough experience in that field. But what was important for me, knowing that I had to take the street language, broken language, Nigerian language, instead of doing it through Nigeria, I transferred it to a broken street language of Congo, Brazzaville, sort of. But maybe in Sweden they have broken Swedish as well in their streets. In Belgium, same. Maybe a language could be adapted to that. You can always do that. The Amanda Gorman's issue arrived in France. It's a question asked in the US, and it ends up in a discussion in France between French people, even though they don't know anything about the context. What is relevant to some fight in the US becomes here. We have to be talking about this. We have to talk about races, identities. And Amanda Gorman did not invent anything, did she? Did we ask ourselves the questions about the quality of her work? Write your poetry, write your poems. If you're invited to the nomination or investiture of Biden, you will be known all over the world because you will talk to millions of people. You will sell ice to Eskimos just because you've been at the celebration of Biden. This poetry, read her texts. I've read other poems, Claude Maquet, Richard White, and others, and her texts. I read all the papers about her. I read her poems in English. Well, normal, you know, they had to be translated. Anyway, nobody in France, in all the papers I read, and I read them all, I think, nobody ever talked about the quality of the original text. Nobody even read her poems. They were not translated, officially translated, but everybody had something to say about the text. This is a national French entertainment. You know, talk about a book you haven't read. Talk about a translation that hasn't been done yet. You don't even know if it exists or if it's good or not. So that's why I will say to my publishing house, I'm waiting for the translation. If the translation is beautiful, if it's original, I'll be the first to support the book. I won't support the color of the translator, whether it might be black, yellow, or whatever. But it's merchandising, selling poetry. That's what's at stake here. It's not a question of color. We read texts that have been translated, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, for example. I read Yuko Mishima the books, and they were not translated by a Japanese guy. I believed in the translation. Why did I believe it was sincere, even though the guy who translated was not Japanese himself? It's the strength, the imagination I read, the emotion that was in the text. There is nothing like a perfect transposition because literature is subjective. It's made of your sensitivity, and you don't govern, you don't control sensitivity with the color of your skin. It's true when you're saying, Maboula, that, well, but they have to be trained, they should know about local language, but you have to learn how to read a book. But if you teach those who translate, go and study in Nigeria or go and study in Jamaica, but the reader is going to read to buy a text. But, you know, can we really do that? It's not a question of skin color. It's a question of ability. There is an unknown knowledge. People, because they're not taught, not enough. So there were disasters in literature. Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example. He sold a bestseller in the US. He was translated into French. I read, sorry, I'm black, but I read the introduction to his book. Sorry. But I did it for business, for money, you know. It was, I needed some money, I was a bit known and successful, so well. No, the title of the book in French. I forgot the title. What was it? Une colère noire, a black wrath or black anger. Why is it a bad title? The original title was Between the World and Me, but I think the translator was not competent enough. He knew I'm not making a comparison between competence, lack of competence, and color of skin. But mistakes are made because there is basic lack of competence. There are groups of people which are not as known as others. That's what I'm talking about. So Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote in English, Between the World and Me, Entre le monde et moi in French. And the title comes from a poem, Richard Wright's poem. Ta-Nehisi Coates is African-American, Richard Wright is African-American. The book Between the World and Me is, with James Baldwin heritage, with this intellectual experience and story. So this title comes from a poem. It's beautiful, it's lyrical. Richard Wright's poem is describing people being beaten up, and you have this character arrives in a prairie, and he sees the leftovers of bodies or ashes, and these ashes come from a guy who was murdered and hanged. And the character in question talks about the gap between himself and the rest of America. He's a black guy, he finds the ashes, and he realizes there is a gap he cannot cross, okay? This became a black anger in French, colère noire. So it was shortened. It's reduced image, it's stereotypes. That's all I'm saying. It's not a question of melanin or color of skin. You have this issue in the body of translators, who's got to work, who's got some work, who hasn't got work, who is paid for what he does, who is not paid for what he does. In my personal case, my book is going to be published in Britain and US, and I chose my translator because I know she's able to do the translation. Is she black? She's white? No, she comes from Congo. She's black. That's good. I'm happy. I know I come from Congo. You know I come from Congo myself. No, she's African American. She's a colleague. I know what she does. I know her work. I can trust her. She's Kamaya lover. She teaches in Columbia University. We know one another. I know what she does. I know how she works, and I know that I can trust Kayama. The fact that she's black, did it count? Was it important? I guess so. But she's not anybody. She's not just black. She's an expert of African diaspora. So it's not a prerequisite at all, is it? Oh, no. You didn't say if there is no black guy to do it, don't translate it. I would have found someone. I would have found a black translator. I'm sure of that. Anyway, what I mean is that some people, we know them, they are white people, black people. Someone else suggested to do it, but I chose Kamaya. I could do that because I speak English. I was asked to do a translation in Arabic. Of course, I don't speak Arabic, so I have to trust my publisher. But I think it's quite legitimate to ask the question of money, opportunity. Who can live with this type of job? And talking about the disaster, Ta-Nehisi Coates, it's this black anger thing. Maya Angelou, I think, her self-biography was translated into French and the title was Une femme noire, a black woman. A title which has nothing to do with the title in English. And Marlon James, who published in 2016 a brief history of 7 killings. It's an incredible story, by the way, Jamaica and the US. It's a great novel. He got prizes, rewards, you name it. But in the book, A Brief History of 7 Killings, you have lots and lots of pidgin, Jamaican pidgin, English. Yeah. Creole, and this Jamaican English is sort of forgotten by the translator. Yadjassi, with Home Going, a great novel again, translated in French as No Home. English title. So there are questions like that. I'm translating at the moment Celia Hartman, Lose Your Mother. And I have questions. How can I translate a certain number of things into French? Maybe you have ideas for me. How do you translate blackness? How do you say blackness in French? You have to think about it. Think. It depends. I have to know the context. What is the context of the word? What is the sentence, the paragraph? Can't just, I cannot give you a word like this. You have to. That's what translation means. That's what translating is all about. I agree with you, but this work can't be done by me because I'm black. Just because I'm black, an Asian guy could do it, maybe. No, it's not only because I'm black, but it's also because I'm black. Sorry, I'm talking so much. We're having a private conversation here, but my field of research was also conditioned by my black identity as an African woman. I understand that there is an underrepresentation. And you pay for this. In France, if you're black, if you do things about the black people, well, you're sort of accused of encouraging communities and so on, whereas it can be an intellectual work. It requires perfection. If you do this, if you are too zealous, if you overdo it, you are sort of sharing a message which is not the message of the book. You are just forcing blackness because that's your job, that's what you're supposed to do. But in the same church, when you do some translation, it means research all the time. You have to be patient. When I translated Uzodimma Uwela, I didn't call the author. For a week, there was one word, a mixture of Yoruba, Igbo. I couldn't find the translation. I didn't know what it meant. I read all sorts of dictionaries, Arabic, the web, whatever. I couldn't find the word. And when I read the meaning of the sentence, it explained that the woman had done something around her waist. And it was like a ball. And I was asking, and I couldn't find the meaning. And one day I said, okay, I have to visit some Nigerian sites. I will ask Nigerian guys. And I visited some sites, meeting people, men looking for women, women looking for men. And I said, well, I'm going to create my profile. And I said, oh, good morning to you all. What does this word mean? They ignored me once. I insisted again and again. And one of them, leave us alone. It means house, home. I said, how can a woman have a home around the waist? And another one said, knife. And someone else, they were lying to me, obviously. They were laughing at me. I said, I forgot about it. And one day, I was walking in Santa Monica, California. I saw this African guy. I said, but he's African, this guy, a guy on the street, tramp. I said, you're African. He said, you're African. I said, you're African as well. He said, I come from Congo, and he said, I come from Nigeria. Oh, good point. That's a good thing. I try to talk about this and that. How are you? I give you water, whatever. And then, by the way, I've got this word I read somewhere. This woman, she's got this ball close to her waist. And he said, you're African? But your mother did that before, didn't she? I said, what? When she has this piece of cloth, it's the knot of the, and that was it. It was fluid, but it was part of my culture. But the word itself I had to do some research about it, and even someone from Nigeria but living in London, without this research, he was going to say that she had a home around her waist, or a house around her waist, whatever. But who saved you? Who gave you the solution? A tramp. Santa Monica tramp. Nobody from Nigeria told me anything true or anything right. They said knife, house. Yeah, but he originally was from Nigeria. He talked to you because he recognized you as an African. But he was not happy with me because he said, but you forgot about what your mother did. We are always fighting. We're an old couple. Don't worry about that.
No, but I'm enjoying the fight. Yeah. Well, I should also say that since we're speaking about translation, there's a certain weirdness in watching both of you speak and seeing the vivacity and the passion. But your words are coming into my ears through a white woman over there. Oh, yes. So I have to mention. And in many ways, I have to trust what she's saying, because I can't go there and choose who the translator is. I have to trust that what I'm hearing about the house around your waist is what you're really saying. So that's the thing with translation. It's, in the end, you have to choose what works for you. And, if you chose an English translator, a translator into English that you're happy with, that's the way it should be. Yeah, and so it has to be an individual decision for authors, and you have to work with the publishers that support you in that sense. And I do feel that institutions, as they get stronger, because it is tied to blackness, it is tied to opportunity, it is tied to the fact that if a Nigerian novel, or if a French novel were going to be translated into a Nigerian language, the translator would, even in Nigeria, a Nigerian publisher will probably go for a French translator that speaks both French and English. So it's not tied to. I just wanted to point out that it's not tied to French society in that way. It's not tied to Dutch society. That in many ways, these inequalities, and they exist, are even manifested in the places where I come from. So there is no question that there's that. But at some point, we should be careful about simplifying it, because the complexity abounds. And so as much as we're finding our individual ways of solving it, should also be aware that those ways one day will get into the institutions, will be institutionalized in a way that makes it easier for a Nigerian one day to translate Proust.
I think we have to stop here. We could stay here for hours, but unfortunately that will not be possible. So you helped me, really, you did a great job. I didn't have to do anything. So many, many thanks. And as Igoni said, what is positive, the positive aspect of all that happened, was that we heard translators. Without the work of the top quality work, in most cases, of translators, all these texts wouldn't cross borders, Atlantide wouldn't have the same flavor. You wouldn't talk to the same audience. We would be separated, as we are not here. The book is an economy. Publishing is an economy. So stop dreaming about it. Literature, culture is great, but people have to live of literature. And you're talking about the choice of title. The problem with a title is that it's usually the decision of the publishing company, the publisher, not the translator. And we could talk of that for hours. I'm part of this book chain, and authors we don't have enough different people in the chain in question, apart from authors and writers, obviously. Thank you very much. And these conversations are difficult, but they are absolutely necessary. We should have these conversations. People should hear different viewpoints. We are like an old couple, Alain and myself, but we keep talking to one another. So we should have these public discussions. Thank you so much.